Okay, let's get going. Hi, everyone. Welcome. What better way to spend a Friday afternoon on a lovely sunny day than talking about Kanban? Hopefully, you'll find this useful. It'll give you a bit of insight into what Kanban is, how it can benefit your organization, and how it can benefit you as an individual as well. I'll give you a few tips throughout just to give you a sense of what it is, how we deploy Kanban in organizations, some of the benefits for you, for your CV, and for your organization as well. And I'll give you a few pointers on where we go from here at the end. Spoiler alert, there is a shameless plug for a training course that I'm launching from Monday, but there is a nice discount code that goes with that for joining this webinar as well. Nonetheless, the content of this I hope is valuable. This is not a sales pitch all the way through, I promise. Hopefully you'll get a lot of value from this as well. So let's get going. And what better place to talk about Kanban than talking about Dino Golf, or I tend to call it crazy golf, but my kids always correct me and say, no, you've got it wrong, John. It's Dino Golf. This is this is about 5 minutes away from my house. It's 18-hole kind of crazy golf course thing that kids can play on. It's got all the usual things you'd expect: water features, some very tricky hillocks that you have to navigate, and curves and things, and yeah, the occasional brontosaurus that gets in the way as well. Now, the reason I'm telling you about this and how this links in with Kanban, so it's a great place to go, and I tend to walk down there with the kids just before we ended up on lockdown, to take them on, just to get them out of the house and let them get some exercise and play around for a bit. And it works really well when it's not busy. Now, the problem with it is when it gets really, really busy, because what happens is I rock up at the shop, I pay my money, we get the golf clubs, and we start wandering in. There's fast service at the till. That bit is really, really smooth. But after that, it kind of all grinds to a halt quite quickly. What I suddenly find is I have to wait to get to the first hole. And once the kids play, they tend to play quite quickly. They'll rush through the first hole, and then you'll find they're waiting for the next one. Someone's come up behind you, so you can't replay the hole because you've got that pressure from behind. You're being kind of pushed through, and yet there's nowhere to go. So what I tend to find is the kids end up spending a lot of time just loitering between holes. Now, what that does, it really disrupts their flow. Whereas I'm trying to do my best to teach them how to hold is it clubs? They are clubs, golf clubs, yes, clubs. I suddenly thought they were cues. It's like, no, that's pool. They take the golf clubs and you try and get them to hold them correctly and get a good stance. Now, by the time they've waited in between each hole for the group of 5 people that seems to always be in front of you, they've forgotten all of that again, and you have to relearn it each time. So each hole is painful, you're relearning, and they're spending a lot of time in between holes. Now, when they're playing, they're great, but when they're in between holes, they get frustrated. You get the meltdowns. You need to refocus them every single time, and believe me, it is painful. And I had a chat with them about it in the local pub one day. I said, look, actually, this is nuts. It's frustrating when I see it like this. I'd far rather know outside that it's crazy busy and it's going to take me forever to get through the system, because then I know I won't need to bother. And we had a talk about it, and I sort of suddenly went, well, actually, this is kind of a bit like Kanban and flow stuff. So we had a chat about that. And we talked about Kanban boards and how you end up with a pull system where you pull things through the system. And we wondered how we could apply that to Dino Golf. I started off by saying it's really quite simple. If you just limit the number of clubs that you've got, then you can't get too many people into the system. It stops you pushing people in when it's busy. It's a pull process because people only get pulled into the Dino Golf when there are clubs available. Now, they told me that wasn't allowed because apparently people have to have different size clubs depending on their ages and things. They need a broad array of clubs. So what we ended up with was a whiteboard that was behind the desk. We used tape on it, and we had I think it was ended up with 16 was what we decided was the right amount of slots. And basically, every time someone came up, they went a little bit Starbucks. And when you came up now, they asked you what your name, what the group name was. Now, you could come up with a team name or your name. So it could be John or Team Dinosaur or whatever you want it to be. And each time somebody else came in for a game, you'd put the family name in one of those boxes on the whiteboard. And you give them their clubs, you give them their balls, and away they'd go for their game. Now, that works great up until about 15, 16. And then at 16, there's no more slots on the whiteboard. And the rules are quite clear for them. They're not allowed to add anyone else into the system until a slot becomes available. What you've then got is a pull system. Only when there's a space can somebody else get pulled into the world of Dino Golf. Now, a few things happen there. Firstly, you start getting a queue building up at that point, because you can't add anything else in. What you've created is you've limited the amount of players in progress, so you're creating that very visual queue outside. What that means for me as a parent is great. I can see at a glance whether it's busy or not instantly outside. I can make a snap decision if I'm driving past whether we go in for a game or whether we don't go in for a game. So I know from that queue whether it's worth doing or not. But there's so much more to it than that. Once you get through that queue and once you get inside, the game is massively predictable. How long it takes to get through is consistent. And the weird thing about it is my kids enjoy it more. They get a better experience, but also from the owner's perspective, people get through faster. So they actually found they increase the throughput of people by putting that limit on the entranceway, creating that queue at the beginning, but then people are flowing through the system happier and faster. And they found they were getting more families through at peak time than they were otherwise. That essentially is what Kanban is through the medium of Dino Crazy Golf. It's about creating a system where you have a pull process. So you're pulling things through into a system rather than pushing things in until the system bursts. You're making it very, very clear where your queues are. So you're creating that queue there so people can suddenly see very clearly what the wait times are without having to wander in and then suddenly find out you're meandering through. And you're creating that predictability. I can get a good sense of how long a game is going to take me now, because I know it's never going to be more than 16 groups working their way around. There we go. That's our quick intro bit. Now, when you think of Kanban, you've probably seen these kind of things before. Kanban boards, they typically follow this kind of format. They'll be next up in our Dino Golf analogy. This would be people that are sort of are queuing up and waiting to join. So we'll have a whole load of items that we want to start doing here. We'll have things that are in progress and we'll have things that are finished. Now, in terms of our pull process here, a few more things that so you may be familiar with this from Scrum teams. What's different here? A couple of things. Firstly, there's this number at the top here. What we do in order to create that that pull process is we limit the amount of work we can have in progress at any time. We can't throw a whole load of tickets or stories or whatever we want to call these items of work into in progress. Because if we do that, what we see the same challenge that we saw at our crazy golf session. We see that people slow down, people get blocked, people are tripping over each other. They're context switching, which slows them down. They're trying to multitask, which slows them down. And if you're looking at software and testing, for example, you end up with change on top of change on top of change, and things trip over and it gets very, very nasty. So we have this idea of limiting work in progress, creating these artificial bottlenecks that end up causing you to pull work through the system when space becomes available, as opposed to pushing stuff in at the top end. Now, we also often have these kind of expedite lanes where you get teams that handle multiple things. So if you've got a team that handle emergencies, so say you've got a software support team, if your company website is down, it would be an expedite ticket and you'd say we're prioritizing this one. You'd still keep your limits and work in progress. So what we'd say is we're going to rush this one through, but if our limit here was 2, for example, we'd not be allowed to pull anything else across until we pulled this one through and dealt with that one. So we're still sticking with our pull process, but allowing the business to expedite things if they need to. And what we're seeing with this is we've still got that predictability of how long it takes things to get through. The only difference you have with this expedite queue is that we're talking about the average time it gets something takes to get through our system. So we can predict with accuracy the average time it will take us to get anything done and through our system. That doesn't mean any individual ticket will take that long. If we expedite things, other things will take longer and vice versa. In terms of how we get things through the system, we've talked about expediting there. We have a very simple rule with Kanban, which is we decide to prioritize things by what we call cost of delay. This is what cost of delay looks like for us here. So we have a class of service. And if you imagine a normal piece of work, very simply put, the longer we delay putting that into a production environment or making it live or making it ready, the longer that takes, the more it's going to cost us, or the more we're going to lose money by not having that, or the value, deferred value, whatever we want to call that section there. The longer it takes, the more value is deferred, basically. We could have items that are fixed date, so there's no point in delivering an item early here. But once we hit that fixed date, it could be very urgent and very costly for us. We've got our expedite items, which are like the website down, where the cost goes up very, very rapidly in a short amount of time. And then we've got these items here that are intangible, where it's very, very hard to put a cost on them. Now, one of the good things about using this idea of class of service to prioritize items that we're pulling into our system is that it encourages people to think really hard about how they can put measures on these intangible items. Because if you can articulate the value of something or the cost of not doing something, then you can quickly demonstrate its value more clearly and help everyone understand why we should be prioritizing that work over something else. Now, Kanban and Agile. So is Kanban Agile? Is Agile Kanban? The two work very hand in hand. Agile, as most people know it today, came about because of the well, it came to a head with the Agile Manifesto, which was written in 2001. A group of kind of angry white men got together in a ski resort to moan about traditional project management and how it really wasn't working for software teams. And they came up with a manifesto, which was basically a series of values that they had, which are in front of you there, valuing individuals and interactions over processes and tools, and so on and so forth. And they had a series of 12 principles that went along with that as well. So they had someone asked if I share the recording. Yes, I will share the recording of this one. So they had the values here, and they had 12 principles that went behind those. Now, Kanban has been around for much longer. Its origins are in lean. The very first Kanban system was put in place in the 1940s. It was a guy called Taiji Ono working at Toyota. It was nothing to do with software. It was about getting cars through a plant for Toyota, but that was the very, very first systems there. So when we tend to look at it, we sort of say Kanban kind of overlaps Agile and operations and manufacturing, because it has come from that background of operations and manufacturing, but also has an awful lot to do with Agile, certainly when we talk about software delivery, because a lot of those principles and values are shared between the two of them. Now, in terms of why, one of the reasons I want to share this and say why it's good for you as an individual and good for you as an organization is what you find is a lot of things you learn in Kanban tend to underpin and support things that you'll learn with other Agile frameworks and other Agile approaches. So if you look at Scrum, for example, you do have this idea of a Scrum board. Kanban uses the same kind of boards, but introduces WIP limits and flow into that as well. So you can take something like Scrum and you can use aspects of Kanban to evolve it. If you're in a large organization using something like Scaled Agile, you can either have teams operating Scrum, or you can have teams operating Kanban, and SAFe is very, very agnostic on that. Now, when you look at teams that do a mixture of support calls and development, so those kind of hybrid teams, and you get that more and more as you go into sort of this DevOps world of working, then you increasingly find that Kanban works better, because you find it a lot harder to do this upfront planning for a 2-week sprint or however long your sprints are, when you have the unpredictability of tickets coming in from the organization. So what we tend to find actually is gently moving those teams to more of a Kanban flow at that point works a lot better for them, because it takes away that that emphasis on getting everything done in a sprint and moves you more towards continuous development. Kanban comes from lean. Lean is based on these principles. I've not brought the 12 Agile principles up on screen. You can Google the Agile Manifesto and see those, but they make for a very ugly slide, so I'll skip past that one. But I will share these principles of lean with you. There are 5 here. So defining value, mapping the value stream. This is why we're doing something, what the value is. mapping the value stream. I'll talk about value streams in a minute. Creating flow through the system. This is what I talked about with Dino Golf, getting that idea of pulling something through and flowing people through the system. People in the case of Dino Golf, tickets or software in the case of our software development teams. Using a pull system, so we're pulling things through rather than shoving them in at the top. If you remember going back to the Dino Golf, shoving more and more people onto the golf course ended up slowing it down, causing frustration, people tripping over each other. That's something we're trying to avoid. And this thing here as well, pursuing perfection, aligns really well with the idea of continuous development that you see in Agile. So where you've got the lean aspects coming together with the Agile manifesto, you see these things that they have in common. Iterative delivery, working in very, very small batches with a preference towards smaller ones if we can. Short feedback loops. So we want to get those feedback loops very regularly. We're releasing software, we want to know very quickly, was it successful? Do we need to refine what we're doing and pursue that quality? Deliver sustainably is in both. Now, what you see with some Agile approaches with Scrum, you can have those regular breakpoints. They talk about actually having some teams try and have a day where actually there's no work going on in between sprints. If you look at things like scaled Agile, they tend to have a week blocked out within each of their release train cycles to use for the teams to recover, to do personal work, maybe catch up on a few bits, maybe work on technical debt. With Kanban, they tend to focus more on a continuous flow. But whichever way you look at it, both of those are looking at trying to come up with a sustainable flow of work. We deliver faster, and this is a very hard one to get your head around. By actually putting these limits in place on our in our flows, forcing these limits on the amount of work in progress, we do get work a lot more predictable and faster because you're taking away a lot of that noise and things tripping over each other. And the other thing that they both have is quality. So quality is implied quite strongly in the Agile Manifesto principles, and it's very explicit in Kanban as well. So both of these do combine and touch together in a number of areas. So Kanban is Agile, but also goes wider into manufacturing, operations, and the rest of the business as well. Now, firstly, I apologize for this one. I actually created this slide for a presentation that I was doing for a scenario where it was about a model and World of Warcraft shop. So that's why the background, but I quite liked it. So I've kind of kept it and used it for other things, even though it doesn't quite stick with the theme of what I'm talking about. But I want to talk about the Kubler-Ross curve, which is actually sort of about bereavement. Well, it also works very well for talking about organizational emotional responses to change. And what I've seen with organizations over the many years that I've worked with PMOs, project management, software development teams, is when you try and what they call go agile, what would often happen is you will get an external consultant in, you'll sheep dip people through a whole load of training, you'll create some new roles in the organization, scrum masters in particular, and we make this quite radical change to how we work. That can be painful, and you get this kind of enthusiasm up front, followed by the, oh, do you know what, this is too big, or it's not working. And once you're down here, you can get people just giving up and leaving the organization. You can get people saying, enough's enough, let's just stop here, and you end up worse off than you were. And getting up here is a real hard slog to get yourself to where you aim to be, which is with this kind of legendary, successful, woohoo, better than we were and much happier at the end of it. I don't advocate that way of working. I am much more a fan of small incremental changes to how we work. And fortunately, when you look at everything that's written about Kanban, they tend to agree with that, and it starts the same way. Kanban advocates starting with what you do now. Not saying it's wrong, not saying it's bad, just saying let's just understand where we are now, and that is where we are. We then agree to pursue evolutionary change. So we're going to take where we are now, and then we are going to agree that we are going to evolve from here and make things better. Initially, we respect the current processes, roles, responsibilities, and job titles that we have in the organization. And not only, I say, not only do we respect those, we actually try and make those super clear and visible so everyone understands what they are. So we try and avoid hiding some of those things. We make them super visible so everyone gets what they are. And we do a lot around culture, encouraging acts of leadership at every level in the organization. That's not just the people you would normally look at as leaders, although they play a very important role, but actually getting every single person in our teams to feel that empowerment, whether that's people in a software development team, the people that support that team, the people in the PMO team, everyone around them, getting them to display those acts of leadership that allow them to actually look at how we can make the organization better, challenge the status quo, see where things need to improve, and use their own skills to stand up and argue for this evolutionary change that we're looking for. Now, if I were to go down to my kitchen right now and suddenly cook a dish that I've never cooked before for dinner, I'd probably want a recipe to follow. Unfortunately, whilst we're not going for a massive big bang change to how we work with Kanban, we do still have a recipe to follow. And this is our recipe for Kanban. 7 steps to it, and they're in a very specific order. What we want to do first, before we do anything else, is create massive visibility of what things look like now. We do that in a number of ways. We map the operational value, we map the value streams that we're working in, so we can clearly see how things flow through our organization and flow through our software teams. Where we have roles, we make those hyper explicit. We make sure the roles that people are doing now are documented and visible. If we have policies, ways of working, then we make sure those are explicit and everybody understands what they are. Ideally, we'll be putting those up on a wall so they're visual to everyone, along with the process flows. So we focus massively on visibility. The reason for visibility goes right back to Lean and the Taiichi Ohno work they did at Toyota. If a problem is visible, everyone can swarm around it and fix it. While those things are hidden under layers and layers of obscurity and under way down deep in teams, hidden behind reports and layers of management, it's very, very hard to fix them. The more visible you can make the process and the rules and the roles that you have around it, the easier it is to get anything fixed. And what you find is actually a lot of those things fix themselves at that stage, because people are looking and go, I've never seen it looking like that before. Looks a bit bonkers, doesn't it? Let's fix it. So you actually get things starting to improve themselves purely by making things visible. Next step is focusing on quality. And just to be clear on this one, what I've seen with a few teams, certainly software teams, is they will immediately look to the testers and say, oh, well, that's you guys, right? We need to go off and do some automated testing. And whilst, yes, that is a key area of focus for us, it needs to focus on the process as well. So again, when we're moving things from one stage to another, is the work of the right level of quality that we need it to be to move? And what we tend to focus on there is having teams getting things like explicit policies. What is the rule for moving from one of our verticals in our swim lane to the next one, from development into test, for example, or test into release? What are the rules that would govern us moving to those? And what are the quality criteria that we set ourselves? Because if we're improving those, we get what Toyota had over Ford, which was not getting a whole load of rework coming back in and disrupting us. Everything is good enough and moves forward the whole way through. Then we focus on reducing our work in progress, limiting that down until we have that nice smooth flow through the system. We focus on delivering often, small incremental releases going out, balancing demand against throughput, prioritizing, and then lastly, attacking sources of variability, which is where things like Six Sigma come in. Now, reason I've drifted quite quickly through those last ones is because the order of the recipe here is the order that you should tackle these things in. If you've not played around with this before, you can get amazing benefit for your organization just by making things your processes hyper visible on walls and seeing how the work is flowing through those in a hyper visible way. That is good for the organization because your management team will understand it and see it and visualize it. It's good for you because you're the person that's doing it and you're the one that's bringing it to everyone's attention. So working through these in this order, this is the stuff that gets you the most bang for your buck. And as you get this right, you then start moving through the recipe. Now, I talked about value streams very briefly a second ago. In terms of value streams, there's the way to look at this is that imagine two types of value streams. Now this comes straight from the Scaled Agile framework. I've borrowed it off them because I quite like it. And they took the view of having two types of value stream. Operational value stream, which is about your business. This is how you start from a trigger and you end up with value being delivered for the organization. That's how the business works, but we kind of struggle a lot when we create value streams for our development teams to actually try and articulate it in terms of trigger and value coming out. And what we end up with is we say, well, actually, we've got development value streams, which are building the systems and capabilities that underpin the operational value stream. So step one is making sure we clearly understand this, because once we understand that, we can understand what the systems are that support that process. And then we're looking at the value streams that we've got here that allow us to get these systems working as best they can, which allows the business to run its operational value streams up here. So we've got two different types of value stream. We have to understand this one, although we're actually working on this one here, because this is how we get ourselves working optimally as software development teams or project teams. But we need to be very mindful of the fact the reason we are making this flow right is to make this system right in order to make this process as optimal as it can be. So we tend to map this one, understand these, map and enhance this one as we go, because there's no point in focusing on this if we don't establish the links up here and understand the systems we're working on really do deliver value at this top line for the operation. WIP limits, I've mentioned WIP, work in progress limits, but explicit policies are the other thing. This ties in with quality and having the rules around things. Sorry, can you excuse me for 1 second? I do apologize. Being at home with children has its challenges. I'm going to be less than 30 seconds. You okay? You okay, Ethan? Thank you. Oh, gotta love kids. Apologies. Back again. So we talked about WIP limits and explicit policies, which are where we're defining quality in between the. So I'm out of breath now. We're talking about the moving in between the columns in our swim lanes to say what is the standard we have to meet to move from one to the other. In Scrum terms, you have a definition of done, for example, how we define something is finished. What we're talking about here is having those at every step. So I ran up the stairs, shouldn't have done that, I'm not built for that. Right. I like this statement here. It says, it's a NASA one. It says, do one thing at a time with supreme excellence. And the reason I like it is because it encapsulates these quite nicely. Do one thing at a time is about limiting WIP. So reducing the amount of things you're doing to focus. And with supreme excellence is an example of a quality policy, explicit quality policy. So when you're working with Kanban, always look to have these two things: limiting WIP, which creates your pull process, and quality standards at every step, doing stuff with supreme excellence. When I share the video, I think I might edit this bit so I don't sound so out of breath having run up the stairs. Now, Little's Law. So a little bit of maths coming in, but it's not too serious, I promise. This is where we talk about reducing our lead time down. If anyone's worked with Scrum, you'll hear a lot about velocity and what the team's velocity looks like and how burn down charts are tracking. Because with Kanban, we're not looking at delivering in regular sprints. We're looking at continuous delivering, continuously pulling tickets through our system. What we're far more concerned about is our average lead time, how long it takes one ticket on average to get through our system from end to end. And this here is the mathematical proof for showing that if we reduce the average work in progress down, we will reduce the average lead time down. So just to give you a very, very simple example, if we have an average of 10 items in progress and we're delivering 2 things every week, then we can say our average lead time is going to be 5 weeks. It will take us on average, any ticket going into our process will take 5 weeks to come through. Now, if we reduce the amount of work in progress down, we reduce the average lead time down. So the less work we have in progress, the faster that work gets through our system. This is why Little's Law is something that's really, really important to us. When you do a Kanban, when you start rolling out Kanban, you'll actually start calculating this, looking at the work you have in progress, calculating your average lead time, and you focus a lot on seeing how you can get this down. Because what you'll find is, if you don't believe me, I challenge you to go back to your organizations and have the conversation with them. If you say to them, I can't let you have everything that you want, all I can say to you is, I can let you have maybe 1 thing or 2 things in the next month. But what I can promise you is those things will be done in, and if that's your average, maybe you'd sort of look at what a bell curve looked over that and say, actually, let me give myself the 80th percentile on that and say, actually, you can have 2 things, but I guarantee you those things will be delivered within 7 weeks rather than the uncertainty you have now. Is that something that would appeal to you? Most of the time the business will say yes, because they like that predictability. Sales teams, marketing teams, operational teams can work with that. They'll be willing to say, all right, I wanted 5,000 items. I realize I can't get that. You're telling me how many I can have, and you're telling me when I can get them by, and therefore when I can request something else. I can start planning around that. So this gives a lot more predictability, which is nice. You can have that conversation about those trade-offs with the business, about how we reduce the amount of work going through, but the trade-off is they get more predictability with it. Now, how we make those improvements is something we call Kaizen. Kaizen, Japanese term, means small change or good change, depending on which translations you look at. And my Japanese is hopeless, so I've got no idea which of them is accurate, but small change or good change. And what we're really talking about here is very, very small incremental changes on a regular basis to accelerate maturity and capability. Now, this ties in with these small acts of leadership that we talked about earlier, encouraging everyone in the organization to constantly look at the process and constantly look at how they can improve it. Now, there's ways you can help this in your organization. So try, and whilst you do have these explicit policies in place, do make it clear and do encourage people to revise those and review them and update them often. They should be things that are frequently changing and evolving, and you should be experimenting around. So do that kind of thing. Encourage bright ideas. Have lots of retrospectives, not just for teams that run to a regular 2-week cadence who have a retrospective at the end of it, but have them for releases, have them for specific events that happened, whether good or bad. Have them just because it's the end of a quarter and we just got the business results, and let's have a reflection on that and see what went well and what we can double down on. But have more retrospectives or anything that gives you that kind of feedback that allows you to increment a lot more. It's not all about having a Kanban board, although that's a big part of it. There's a number of different feedback loops that we can use in Kanban. I just want to briefly explore some of those with you. So first one, the daily Scrum, as Scrum calls it, we still tend to have a daily stand-up meeting with Kanban as well. A few things that I will say about it, though, that are probably a little bit more Kanban than normal is it's a great opportunity to gather feedback because you're walking the board every time. Now, what you see with a Scrum session is you kind of go around the team asking in that kind of creeping death way, asking them what they did yesterday, what they're doing today, and what their blockers are. With Kanban, you're doing it slightly differently. You're walking the board. Now, starting on the very right-hand side of your board, going back through your board. So the reason we start on the right is because the things on the right are closer to being done. And getting something into done is what we're aiming for all the time. There's no value in moving something from development to test. There is a lot of value in moving that car from test, therefore into done. So we always start on the right, the whole team looking at what we can move through, because we're pulling things through from the right-hand side. If we move stuff from the right into done, we're freeing up a column where we can pull something across. Just like with our crazy golf, if we move somebody off hole 18, person from 17 can be pulled through. We focus on finishing things. There's a big emphasis on finishing. So we're not focused necessarily on who's doing what. We are focused on what would it take us to do as a team to get that item there into finished. And then we look at ways to deal with blockers. So in the same way as what's blocking an individual, we're looking at what's blocking the board. Do we swarm on that? Do we escalate up to a scrum of scrums or blockbusters call, or whatever you want to call that level above it, or blockbusters team you might have? So how do we deal with those blockers and how do we move them forwards? So we've got that as a great feedback loop, because if you're walking the board, you start to see where the problems are fairly instantly. This is your retrospectives that I spoke about earlier, getting the team doing those quite frequently. Coming up with, this is an article I did for APM, but introducing things like OKRs, where you've got measures that aren't a milestone-based objective, but you've got dials that you're creating where every single release you're doing is releasing a tiny bit of value, and you're using that to start seeing how, and you're using that incremental improvement to see whether the software you're releasing or the code you're releasing or the systems that you're releasing are really working, are really giving you the benefits that you want to achieve. This one here is about breaking down the work that you're doing and understanding the nature of it. So we tend to split work down into whether it's a feature, which delivers new business value, whether they're defects, which is about improving quality, risks, so things like compliance, GDPR work, for example, and whether things are debt, so removing impediments to future delivery, so refactoring and those kind of things. We try and categorize all of the work, certainly with the software team, probably less relevant to others, but as a software team, we try and categorize them into these sections. And the reason we do this categorization is because when we look at it over time, we can start to build up a picture of what our teams are working on. I don't know how many times you've experienced in organizations where people think we've got teams that are developing brand new features, and then you look at it and realize they haven't really delivered any new features for about 3 months. And suddenly you think, oh, well, they're not doing their jobs properly. And then you look at it a bit more and find actually they've been really focused on defects and working on security and compliance work, because there's been an awful lot of this going on in organizations for the last few years. So then we can have the conversation again. Once we've made that hyper visible, which, as you recall, was one of the key things we wanted to do, we can then have the conversations about actually what does feel right for us. Have we got the balance right in our organization? How do we want to adjust our priorities and change that? So we're using this to look at the information, the work that's flowing through our system, making sure we're getting that right mix around it to deliver value. And the other one, I don't know if anyone has played around with these, but we do say goodbye to the burn down chart with Kanban, but we do say hello to cumulative flow diagrams instead. Now, what these do for us, they look a bit scary when you start playing around with them, but they are so valuable. And what they give us is a visual indication of how much work in progress we have at each of the columns in our board over time, and also what our average lead time is. And you can see how that improves over time, and it visualizes the work. Visualizes the walk, I've said there, my goodness. It visualizes the work. It definitely has nothing to do with the walk. Visualizes the work over time, column by column. So what you get is that visualization of where work is getting stuck, where teams are improving over time, and how your average lead time hopefully is getting faster and faster, which is what the main goal should be for you. So that's a kind of a whistle stop tour through some of the key things of Kanban. As I said, it's not something where I would turn around to you and say, stop doing what you're doing now. Kanban is the way to go for that. But what I am saying to you is take a look at your processes now. Take a look at the recipe I showed you earlier and see how you can start from there and start visualizing work that's happening in your organization, focusing on quality and how you can improve that, and working your way through that recipe. Because even if you're not a pure Kanban shop, and even if your organization doesn't intend to go Kanban, even just by following that exercise of mapping out your value streams and starting to visualize work more, even if you don't call it Kanban, you will absolutely start to see improvements with the flow of delivery flow, the flow of information, and the quality of what's going out the door as well. Now, this is a very short webinar on a Friday afternoon. You're not going to come away from this as an expert in Kanban, so apologies for that one. In fairness, I don't think I ever said you would be on that one, but you probably want to know where to go from here, and this is where probably the little bit of a plug thing comes in. So there's a few things. If you are a reader, if you read a lot of books, then I would highly recommend the two books there on the left, David Anderson's Kanban and Mike Burrows' Kanban from the Inside. I have no relationship to either of those books or the authors, but they are fantastic books. If you want to read more into Kanban, I can highly recommend those for you. But for me, the reason I have set up this this webinar is to tell you about the Kanban for Software Delivery online training course that I'm launching on Hot PMO on Monday. It's a pure online course. It's a series of bite-sized videos. They're all sort of 4 to 7 minutes long. I think we're about 62 of them in total. But it takes you through the journey of what Kanban is, how it works. We expand on a lot of the items that we've talked about today. We actually take you through the journey of building out some of these boards, what those explicit policies look and feel like. We go into WIP in a lot more detail, what WIP levels should be as you start your experiment and how you evolve them from there. And we'll go through the metrics in a lot more detail and help you create your own cumulative flow diagrams and how you start really evolving your teams from wherever they are now, which is fine, into teams that pursue this idea of evolutionary change and try and make themselves the best they can be. So that's the other thing that I wanted to remind you of, looking at those foundational principles. So read the books, have a look at the course, and then start with these foundational principles in your organization of starting where you are now, agree to pursue evolutionary change, visualize and respect your current processes as you get started, and encourage those acts of leadership at every level in your organization, from individual contributors to senior managers. Now, in terms of this course that launches on Monday, it's on sale on the website for $225. A few things. I know there's quite a few UK people on here as well. If you were interested in the course and wanted to do something in pounds, that's absolutely fine. Just let me know and I can raise a pound invoice for you instead. The reason it's in dollars is because it seems to be a more acceptable currency globally, and there's a lot of people in America. So that's the main reason for that one, but I absolutely can do it in pounds for you if you prefer. The course goes live on Monday, but anyone who's signing up early, I am doing a free coaching session with every single one of these as well. So basically, once you get through the course content, you can reach out to me, book a session, and we'll do an online hour session where I can help you with the real world application of this. And what I will do after this course, Matthew is asking, I will send you out an email that will include a link to the course, but also crucially, it will include a discount code for you that brings that cost down substantially, purely for people who have taken the time out and committed themselves to taking time out on their Friday afternoon to come and listen to me talk about Kanban. So you will receive that very, very shortly, along with the video of this session, the link to the course, and discount code as well. Now, have we got any questions? I'm just having a look at the question and answer session there. And there is a Q&A board. If you want to ask any questions in there, feel free. So Matthew's got, so the cost is $225, but there will be a discount code in the email that comes out. So do have a look at that. And yes, that will include the link to the course in there as well for you. Any other questions? Doesn't have to be about the course. This is just as much about introducing you to Kanban as it is about me shamelessly trying to plug a training course that I'm launching. Do we have a certification for Kanban like we have with Agile, CSM, CSPO? There is. So the Scrum Alliance, I believe, do a certified course that is that combines Lean and Scrum, so they do a certification. There is also the Kanban University. If you Google them, they do certified courses as well. This course is, there is a certificate at the end of it to say that you've been through it. I will validate those because I will have a record of who's gone through the course. You can put those on your CV, and if anybody wants to validate that you have done that, I can verify that quite happily for you. It's that level of certification. There are tests all the way through it, checking your knowledge, but this is not a certified exam in the sense that there is a proctored exam at the end of it. The emphasis here is very much on you learning how Kanban works and learning how you can apply it in your organizations. So if you're looking for certification, I'm sure it's is it Kanban University or Lean University? My mind's gone. It's one of those two, either Lean University or Kanban University do a certified course. And I think Scrum Alliance do a certified course that is Kanban Scrum. So those are two that you could look at. This one here, the focus is very much on understanding how it works and how you can apply it in your organization. So it's far more from the emphasis is on practical working with it rather than getting yourself a certification, if that makes sense. Any final questions? Going once? Going twice? Okay, thank you. Chris Waters there asking what the PMO angle is, and so just because I know Chris, and Chris knows me from obviously my company is Hot PMO, PMO consultancy. So why is a PMO person talking about Kanban? My view on that is simple. The role of a PMO in an organization is to reduce the amount of effort it takes to get the right things delivered in the organization. I think Kanban is a great way of achieving that. And we've talked about the prioritization elements of it, talked about how we prioritize work and how we flow work efficiently through a system. I believe it's one of the tools that is very useful to PMO people in the same way as understanding different project frameworks and project methodologies are. So it's a different way of delivering. And I think it's good for project people to be able to understand different ways of working. It's also very good for PMO people to understand those different ways of working. And on this course in the metrics section, there is that focus on how we do measure those things so we can work with the business. Say, do you realize the mix of items that we're pushing through? And do you understand what our average lead times look like? So we give PMO teams those methods of understanding how to visualize work flowing through the system and how to communicate to the business and how to understand where teams may be struggling and how to guide them as well. So I'd say that'd be the PMO angles on that one, Chris. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for today. Thank you, everyone. I will get an email out to you shortly, which will include a link to the course, a link to the video from this webinar, and a discount code for the course as well. Thank you very much. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to email me. I'm John McIntyre. My email address is john@hotpmo.com. And of course, you'll get an email from me soon as well. Thank you very much for giving up your Friday afternoons. It was lovely to be with you. Take care.